Hi there, and welcome to Bourbon Turntable. We are the show that blends the love of whiskey with the love of music. And tonight, I am Kevin Rose. I'm always Kevin Rose, whether I like it or not. But I have with me Drew Crawley. How are you, Drew?
Hey, I'm doing well. As we are recording this, it is one day post the St. Patrick's Day festivities here in Louisville, Kentucky, and I am once again suffering from my poor decision making on a Saturday night.
This is a recurring theme. Okay.
Yeah,
That
yeah.
the last
So,
couple of times we recorded, this has been something that has come up, Drew.
yep. I consistently get one day off a week, and it's Sundays right now. And
Yes.
so typically Saturdays are for bad choices, and then Sundays are for Gatorade and pizza and tacos and anything else I can put in my stomach to absorb last night's bad decisions. So, you know,
All right. Also with us, as always, Benjamin Eves, distiller at large. How are you, sir?
I'm good, man. Had a fun little tour of the Old Pepper Distillery in the distillery district down in Lexington here
Yeah.
today. So yeah, very cool. Doing
I
good.
visited that place. I did not
Mhm.
get the tour, but got to have a few samples when I was there.
Sure.
But I don't think I tried anything that was their own distillate now.
Yeah, no,
So
they've got some interesting stuff rolling off the still now. So a lot of their single barrels that they're putting out it's still MGP sourced.
mhm.
And as far as rye goes, they're still pretty darn phenomenal. Went through a flight of those, but got to try a sample of a rye that they produced that was
Mhm.
I think it's about 50-50 malted rye with unmalted rye with standard
Awesome.
rye. And the malt
wow.
character from the rye really carries forward. It was
Yeah.
absolutely delicious. And then we got to pull a sample straight off the still, which was a bourbon mash, 51% corn, and then the rest was rye and malt. And that was, again, just delicious as far as just a white dog goes. So I'm really kind of excited about the future of where that distillery is headed. I think they're under good management and going a good
Mhm.
direction. Um, so something to keep an eye out for in the future for sure.
Mm.
Awesome.
Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
we'll have to have them on the show sometime. I
sure.
think. Yeah. Well, as I said, I'm Kevin Rose, and I'm coming to you from a shack outside Lagrange, Kentucky. That is, and we are talking tonight about Texas whiskey and your favorite trio from the state of Texas, ZZ Top.
Right,
I couldn't
Right.
find my fake. I have a beard somewhere. I was gonna
right.
wear the beard and put on some sunglasses, but I couldn't find it.
Cheap sunglasses.
So I thought I'd sing
Yeah.
for you just a little bit, not a lot, because everyone would turn off the show immediately, but a
Thank
little
you.
bit. So, at any rate, we're going to start out here with a very important announcement that you all
Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, hit that bell notification. Don't forget to comment if you're watching live in the chat. Leave a comment down below afterwards. Always remember that thumbs up.
Thank you, Mike. Thumbs up, as always. Great job. All right. So, Benjamin is going to take us through a couple of tastings on Texas
Sure.
whiskey. So, which one do we need to start with?
Let's start with A.
Start with A.
Well,
We have A and
alphabetical.
B.
Okay.
A and B.
Letter A. So
That's
I
pretty
picked.
predictable.
Yes. I picked a couple of interesting and maybe slightly unique Texas distilleries that
Mm-hmm.
I thought you guys might not be 100% familiar with or have experienced yet. Texas is almost become a region unto itself as far as whiskey goes. Their bourbon and what they're producing out there, single malts, etc., kind of have a very unique character. They've got the whole Texas distillery trail that's going on,
Mm-hmm.
and I think there's some big money, big investment going on into Texas whiskey right now.
Mhm.
So I think it's a place to definitely keep an eye out for. And for me personally, palate wise, it's an area that I really dig. Preferentially, I love what's going on in Texas. So,
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, Drew, what was your first experience with Texas whiskey?
Oh man. I think it was probably back when I worked for Brown Foreman. We had a group coming in uh, from Garrison Brothers, and they
Yeah.
brought us, just some things to taste. And my first impression was, okay, this is a whole different thing. instead of
Mhm.
oak, you pick up some hickory notes for wood. It tends to
Right.
be a lot drier, maybe even like mesquite kind of notes, depending on which one we were tasting. So heavier on tannins, definitely heavier on the oak influence, and I assume that was due to heat. But it was not an altogether pleasant experience up front.
Yeah.
But I think as my palate has developed, and also as the region has developed,
Mhm.
and they're starting to figure out the differences in climate and aging and things like that, it's
Right.
starting to become much more something that I like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
kind of tend towards.
There's some things they're figuring out there. There's definitely an impact of the region that goes on from the heat to the impact of the oak. Um, and also, if you go into it with the mindset of trying to compare this to like a classic Kentucky style whiskey or
Hmm.
bourbon, you're going to miss the mark. It's just different. It's
Yep.
Yeah.
uniquely different. Either you get it or you don't, in my opinion. For me, I like funky, I like earthy, I like different,
Mhm.
and Texas kind of fits that ballpark with that. But I can understand a lot of people going in with traditional mindset of what they think bourbon is, and you try Texas and it's different. And
Mhm.
also, I think Garrison and Balcones are probably the two big ones that most people experience with Texas whiskey first, and they definitely they swing for the fences as far as a unique flavor profile
Yeah.
goes, especially
Yeah.
with the big oak influence. So
Yeah.
Yep.
My
And
first
this one,
experience was well, unpleasant. We're
sure,
all brothers here, so I won't say what that unpleasant experience was, but I didn't enjoy it.
hmm
And then Maggie Kimbrell, who is president of Bourbon Women now and
right,
writer for American Whiskey Magazine, she said, "You need to try Iron Root." I said, "All right." And she said, "And I'll give you contact information with Jonathan Licorice. You can contact him and you can write an
right,
article about it." So I said, "Okay." So I found a bottle of Harbinger,
mhm.
and she was not wrong.
right.
Yep.
Fantastic.
Yep.
And I don't know, maybe 2 years now that I'd found Iron Root and wrote an article for ABV on that, and just I'm a big fan of what they're doing.
Yeah.
Uh, Very unique approach to their aging process as well, and just doing some fantastic stuff. And Ben, I know you're a big fan of Jonathan and Robert and everything they're
Big
doing
fan,
there.
yeah, big fan of the family. I've gotten to spend some time with them there at Iron Root, and I love their process and what they do. Personally, my experience with Jonathan, I think he may be one of the, if not the most underrated palate in the industry.
Mm,
What
Mm.
that guy, flavor wise, and his analysis of barrels and profiles, etc., um, it's almost unparalleled. His blending skills, guy does not get enough credit. I mean, a lot of people look at the early impact of Nancy Fraley early
yep.
on with their company and helping them develop what they do, but I think a lot of that credit really needs to transition to Jonathan and what he's learned, what he's applied, and what he does. It's absolutely ridiculous in a good way. So yeah, Iron Root is definitely, if you're looking to really, I don't know, that first step into Texas whiskey. A lot of people go Garrison or Balcones. Really, I direct people towards Iron Root. I think you're going to have an
Mhm.
incredible experience with their whiskeys.
I would agree with that 1,000%. I think they're doing some great stuff there.
Right.
So, Drew, what are you getting off this first one?
Yeah. So right off the nose, I get like a blueberry, kind of a blueberry syrup note, and then on the second sniff, there is like an alfalfa grass. It reminds me of barns or
Sure.
trailers growing up. You kind of get that in the air, dusty kind of a thing, but
Right.
it's definitely kind of herbal as well. On the palate, there's so much honey to me, almost a little bit toffee-like as well. It's super balanced, and
Mhm.
I really kind of enjoy this. I'm very
Yeah,
intrigued to see where this goes
yeah.
because I think I'll be looking for a bottle.
The this is funny because the note that I wrote was it was like a breakfast cereal fruit
Mhm.
blueberry.
Blueberry. I can see it.
And then I said, then it on the nose, and then I said, okay, then it's kind of earthy and grassy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we're kind of in line there.
I would agree.
That's funny.
I don't disagree with any of that on that. I get a little bit of a granola, maybe a little bit of a granola kind of note going on, which to me has almost become very characteristic of a lot of Texas whiskeys, from single malt to bourbon.
There's a little hazelnut,
the blueberry note, the hazelnut is exactly on. So I'll let you guys talk a little bit more about this, and I'll give you the breakdown on what we're dealing with here.
Any guesses? Can you tell us the size of the barrel before we guess the age? Is that
as far as I know, they're using standard size barrels on this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess this has to be in the 5 to 6 range. And we just drank a lot of higher proof rum right before this, but I'm gonna guess it's between. I'm gonna guess between 1.5 and 1.15. I'll just put my neck out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm sure I'm incorrect, but
right. Well, I mean, and beyond getting to the statistical analysis, how do you feel about this one? Are you liking it? Is this something you really enjoy? I know you said you'd like to maybe find a bottle of this.
Yeah, I could sip on this all evening, no problem. Be very, very pleased with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's again, if you're somebody that all I like is Weller, then you're going to drink this and you're going to probably turn your nose up at it.
Right.
But if you're somebody that likes a variety, even if you're like a variety of Kentucky whiskey, I think you'll enjoy this.
You'll find something. Yeah. I think especially if you're familiar with more craft level whiskeys than the big heritage brands, then you're going to understand the profile of this a little better too.
Mm-hmm.
So this one, this particular distillery comes out of the Pernod family, which I'm familiar with as a Kentucky Artisan employee. It's under our umbrella, if you will. They're out of Fort Worth, Texas. This is TX. So this is they first released an American whiskey, which was a blend of things. This is their first straight bourbon that they produced. It is a wheated bourbon. So you're mentioning Weller there, Kevin. So it's in that wheated profile. Which I think for me, that blueberry note, I have found that in some particular wheated bourbons, especially the Wyoming whiskey produces, which is a wheated bourbon, the Wyoming bourbon. That for me produces a very distinct blueberry note to it. This is interesting. It's got a little bit of that, for me, what I call that Texas oak funk going on there. But it's got a little bit more of a fruitiness that's different. For me, the nose I enjoy a lot more than the palate. The palate finishes very quickly. Like this hits and bam, you're straight to the finish. There's not a lot going on in between. You pick out those notes up front, that blueberry, that granola, that kind of fruitiness, and then boom, you're straight to the finish on this one. And that for me, I wanted to get you guys' take on this one. It's not my favorite Texas whiskey. There's a lot more I would put in front of this one, but I find it a little bit unique, a little bit different. And so I'm not going to sit here and throw everything that's great and wonderful at you guys. Sometimes I'm going to throw up something that might be a little challenging or maybe not be so great. But as far as what I've experienced in Texas, this one falls down about mid-tier. If you will. But I think it's fine, but it's not. This isn't knocking any home runs for me personally, but it's still a good whiskey.
No, but I think it's got some unique characteristics, both on the nose and on the palate. I agree. The finish is pretty quick, and you're kind of left with that, hay bale kind of note on the finish.
And that's the youth. I'm going to hit at you, Drew. I don't think this is hitting anywhere near the 5 to 6 year mark on this. Most Texas whiskeys are within that 2, 3, 4 year range. With the heat and what they experience in aging down there, the oak impact, they're usually finishing these out a little earlier. Now there's some places like Iron Root that are developing techniques to deal with that, and they're pushing that age range, 5-6 years. But most Texas whiskeys are going to be in a 2 to 4 year range, age wise.
Cool.
And they're also dealing with a huge evaporation rate that Kentucky is not seeing. So
very different.
And proof wise, this one's coming in at 90.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah.
Drinks a little hotter than that.
Mm-hmm. It sure does. I've had some much higher proof whiskeys that drink a little bit smoother than what this one comes in at.
Mm-hmm. But but
Fascinating.
I've not had TX before, and
Sure.
that is a product of, what is it, Firestone and Robertson?
Firestone and Robertson, yes.
Yep.
Yeah. Now they do. One of their distillers actually has a book that he wrote, I think, came out within the last year or two, about dealing with terroir in whiskey, and it's I think a very interesting read for those who really want to take that deep dive into whiskey and spirits production. So he's got a great understanding. So I think with that, I'm looking forward to the future of what TX can do. They're also a pretty big distillery as well.
Yeah. A lot of Texas distilleries talk about terroir.
Right.
More so than Kentucky distilleries, for sure.
Right. And part of that is you're dealing with Kentucky distilleries. You're dealing with, especially a lot of the heritage guys, they're on a production level where they cannot, they're having to source corn and grain in from all over.
Right.
Whereas Texas, you're dealing at a production level, they're sourcing locally. Some of these places, the farms are just right down the road.
They're sourcing the corn locally. They're not sourcing the rye locally.
The corn, the wheat. There is some rye production that's going on locally in Texas. The one thing they're having to source in is the barley, the malt component.
Sure.
But
and there may be a grain terroir there, but to me, a lot of that terroir is more from the climate and the effect that has on the aging and the influence on the barrel, assuming that they're using a non-climate controlled warehouse.
Yeah.
Right.
And a lot of them are, and we'll get into that on sample B.
Okay.
That you're looking at.
Okay.
Which I will use that to. Well, when we get to that one, we'll get to that one. We'll talk about that.
All right. So sample B. Let's
move to sample B.
Let's move to sample B. I like that pop.
There you go.
Interesting.
It's a lot darker than the other one.
Sure.
In terms of flavor profile as well as color, but
yeah.
I get almost like a cocoa bean and tobacco leaf kind of a thing on this one. Maybe even a little bit on the darker nutty thing, like a walnut.
I had a chocolate covered strawberry.
I could see all of that. Yeah.
Pretty tasty.
Uh-oh.
All right, I already stuck my neck out once. I don't want to make any bets this time. Kevin, you want to go on, any guesses on age and proof or anything like that?
Well, I looked up the TX, and it says that it's 4 years at least. It's kind of surprising.
That's usually about the max that you're seeing.
Yeah.
With a lot of Texas beer, about 4 years is where they'll push it to. Anything beyond that, they're typically going to have to use some special techniques.
Yeah.
To minimize the angel share and the oak impact, which is part of what Iron Root is doing. They've gone to larger barrels, 60+ gallon size barrels, elevage. They're proofing down in the barrel. over time, a lot of brandy techniques, different
Yeah.
things that are going on, to help mitigate.
I was very interested and intrigued by the way, by the elevage concept that they
Sure.
employ, and what adding water during the aging process,
Right.
so that water interacts with the whiskey as it's developing, interacts with the barrel over time.
Right.
So it's not
Mhm.
just, okay, we're going to proof this down to 90 and dump a bunch of water in it at the end.
Yeah. Which is honestly, that's the way majority of it's done here in Kentucky.
Sure.
So any more thoughts on this one?
It has some nice.
What are you guys drinking? I mean, what do you think you're drinking here?
Well, Smirk tells me it's younger than we think it is.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What we think we're drinking. So I'm thinking, okay, is this a Texas single malt, perhaps?
Well, that's my question. Is this even bourbon? Is this a rye? What is this?
I didn't think it was bourbon.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it is either.
I'm thinking it may be a single malt. It's got a nice sweetness at the beginning of the palate, and then it gets a little oaky, but not. I'm not a big fan of oak. I mean,
Sure.
some people like a 22-year bourbon. I really don't want to lick a tree.
Like a Stag Junior, I'm going to smack you in the face with a 2x4 kind of.
Yeah.
With wood.
I'm not. That's not me. We have
Knob Creek 15-year-old kind of thing.
Drew and I have some friends that we drink with from time to time,
Right.
that are people that like to drink an oak tree. That is not me.
Right.
But there's some oak in it,
Right.
but it's not what I would call offensive oak. I'm thinking, I think this is a single malt.
Okay. Drew, you got a guess or?
I would
thoughts on
agree.
that?
I would
Okay.
agree. I'm not going to be surprised though if you throw some other crazy grain out there that this is a rice based, not rice specifically, but something in that vein.
Right. So when I was at Iron Root, I got to sample a barrel that was a Mesquite whiskey. It was actually distilled from the beans of a mesquite tree, which are technically a grain, classified as a grain, so they can call it a whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand how that whole process, but that was unique and different. But that is not this. So I'm not throwing out anything crazy to you guys. Throw a little red hair.
Just a quick brag, yeah.
I was about to be very, very excited.
Yeah, I'm sorry. No, this is a Texas single malt, but I'm going to introduce some unique elements to this, because this starts with Andalusia Whiskey Company, which is down kind of outside San Antonio, Blanco, Texas area. I got to visit that distillery this past year. Unique, amazing. They're producing some really unique stuff. But this was part of the Alliance series from Crowded Barrel, which some of the people out there listening may be familiar with Crowded Barrel whiskey. So it's one of the most unique distillery concepts out there, in that they are completely crowdsourced. So they do a lot of sourcing from different distilleries, kind of in that almost that Scottish style of independent bottling. And what they'll do is they'll source individual barrels and they'll bring them to the distillery there, and they'll do the finish aging there. And so I've tasted stuff from there that is MGP. I've tasted stuff from there that is Wyoming, from other Texas distilleries. And the interesting thing is, as those barrels are aged on site down there in Austin, Texas, they pick up that Texas character to it. Even the MGP stuff, it picks up that Texas oaky funk. So you want to talk about terroir, Kevin?
Yep.
That's even in the aging process that happens. They're also distilling their own stuff, and what is unique about them is it's crowd-funded and crowdsourced. Yeah. So they, through a Patreon group, you can join in, you can participate, and pretty much every decision that goes into the production of the whiskey, they will put up to a vote to the Patreon, hey, we've got these barrels. What do you want us to do with them? Are we going to finish them in this? Here's 4 different proofs that we've decided on. Which proof do you want to see this bottled at? All the decisions are coming down to being crowdsourced by those participating in the Patreon. And so far, I've never had anything from there that has been disappointing in any way, shape, or form. So this is part of what their Alliance series is. So they'll partner with different distilleries, bring in some barrels of what they're doing, age it there on site, and then bottle it. And they sell them in these little 375s that are really cool. Yeah. This is Andalusia. So this one is one of 189 bottles. It's bottled at 100 proof. And this is Andalusia's single malt. I've had a number of Andalusia's different single malts, and they're usually very fantastic. So this is another just really interesting independent distillery there in Texas, and that went through a whole different process of going through Crowded Barrel. So,
yeah, very cool.
I appreciate you sharing a non-bourbon or rye with us in this,
right?
Because I think that the American single malt market is going to be something really fun to watch and enjoy.
I completely agree. It's as far as all the American whiskey markets out there, this is what intrigues me and interests me the most, is the American single malt market. I think the future potential for that is huge.
Yeah. A year or two ago, I thought it's going to be corn whiskey. No,
right.
It's American single malt.
Right.
And that's the next big thing. In my opinion, because you look at what folks are doing out in Colorado, like Lenny's doing at Deerhammer.
Yep.
You look at there's
you have
even
Stranahan's there.
Yes.
And
you look at even there's a little distillery down in Knoxville, Tennessee called Modern Spirits that has done a single malt that anytime that I blind it to somebody, they love it. And then I tell them, yeah, this is a single malt from Knoxville.
Right.
They don't believe it. I think this is going to be a really fun market to watch. And, we'll do a good single malt show or 2 or 10.
Right. There's a lot of great options to pick from. I mean,
there
from
are some
Virginia
really
to Texas up to,
yes.
Washington State and whatnot. There's just some phenomenal single malts that are going on out there. Yeah.
Stuff. So just Texas whiskey in general.
Right.
They started the Texas Whiskey Trail, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago.
Right. If even that, really.
Yeah, they've got the Texas Whiskey Festival, which I think is in May every year.
Right.
And every year being maybe in the last 3 or 4 years, they've been doing that. And it's grown a long way from just being Garrison Brothers and Balcones.
Right.
And I really enjoy Balcones. I think they do some great stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Their single malt is on point. It is really, really good.
Yep. They
but
do some really fun stuff with it too.
Yes. But you went from maybe 8-9 years ago, you had 2 distilleries in the state of Texas, and now
that were known. Yeah.
And now you've got 25 or 30 that are known, but not a lot of them are known outside the state of Texas. So part of the issue with Texas is distribution.
Yeah, Texas, and that again brings up the whole state to state, the blue laws, the distribution, that kind of thing. Texas is dealing with some archaic laws in that regards, which makes it difficult for a lot of the distillers and a lot of these distilleries to get their product out and to be known. But they're also they're garnering recognition. I mean, the Independent Spirits Council 2020 Iron Root was their bourbon of the year. I saw a recent article of one of the more popular whiskey magazines, and they had Iron Root Icarus on the cover. Balcones and other different Texas distillers my friend Josh Gardner down at Ranger Creek was featured in a Whiskey Advocate not too long ago discussing Texas whiskey. So they're starting to catch the press that I think is well deserved and well earned, but it's still there's some things that need to happen so that access can be greatly increased. But,
my big gripe about Iron Root is distribution, because here locally we get Harbinger, which is awesome. I love it, but I need a little something else too.
Yeah, the Promethean, the Icarus, and the difficulty you're dealing with is scale. I mean, they're still a small craft producer, and so for them to try to meet the demand of what is going on, especially since they blew up with the whole Bourbon of the Year award. They just can't do it. And that's what a lot of these guys see. You got to understand, this isn't Maker's Mark. This isn't Jim Beam. These are small craft producers, and they can only produce to a certain level. Even though the demand asks for much more, it's to make that jump on a financial level, to be able to produce at that level. It's a massive undertaking. So,
I wonder if, and when you look at what happened with Bardstown Bourbon Company, them being bought out, I know that private equity group, their pattern is buy something on a platform and then expand that platform through other acquisitions.
I
mean, and it's not necessarily to be more of the same, but get into other segments. So if you're getting into other segments, I would think you would want to get into Texas, because that is a unique segment of the American whiskey market.
And the reality is the investment money is going there big time. There's a couple of distilleries that come to mind. Still Austin is one that's really catching steam, and that is a huge distillery. They have a freaking massive column still, and they're cranking it out. They've got people like Nancy Fraley involved in helping them develop their product. You have Gulf Coast distilleries down in Texas, and they're looking to be the MGP of Texas. They're a massive commercial scale distillery, and I got to sample a rye from there recently that just honestly blew me away. As far as it's got that unique Texas character, but it's also flavor wise just interesting and really, really good. I was surprised, but they're looking to produce on a massive scale. So it's Texas is coming along in that way.
I think that obviously outside of Kentucky, you've got, to me, it's Tennessee, Indiana, and Texas are the big three behind Kentucky.
And I think Colorado is trying to come along there, but I think Texas is the one right now that's got the momentum rolling forward.
I think you've got some real innovators in Colorado, like Todd Leopold and like Lenny Eckstein. I think those guys are doing some very unique stuff, and love their product, and think they're pretty brilliant in the way they are approaching things. But Texas is Texas, and when we get into talking about ZZ Top, Texas is different. It really is. And the fact that Texas whiskey takes on a life of its own and a brand identification of its own should not be a surprise. All right. So any other thoughts on Texas whiskey before we flip over to ZZ Top?
I'm a big fan. That's what I will say.
Of Texas whiskey,
and ZZ Top.
Yes. Awesome. Well, as we're ending side A of the show, we're going to flip it over to side B in just a second. But first, we want to tell you about this event at Beck's Mill. This is a presentation by our friend Alan Bishop on the history of distilling in Indiana's Black Forest. It's going to be on April 23rd. 4 p.m. There will be a tasting. 5 p.m. There'll be a presentation by Alan. This is done in conjunction with Spirits of French Lick, where Alan is the head distiller and alchemist. $10 for admission. If you are in the Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana, Illinois area, Beck's Mill is a beautiful place, and you will learn a lot. And there'll be, like I say, 4 p.m. There'll be tasting and bottle sales from Spirits of French Lick. So they'll probably have some really cool stuff there for us to try and buy. And this presentation from Alan is sure to be entertaining and educational, as really any conversation with Alan is. So check that out. Go to www.becksmill.org for more information, and we hope to see you there. All right, so let's talk a little bit about that little band from Texas, ZZ Top. Okay, so ZZ Top fans, yes, no?
Of course.
Yeah. I am not as much, but only because this is kind of something that falls outside of my natural wheelhouse.
Yep.
I have an appreciation for it, but it's not something that I
Right.
listened to growing up or anything like that. So this may be more of an educational episode for me than anything.
How. Well, part of the reason we're talking about ZZ Top is we're talking about Texas whiskey. We're going to do we're planning to do a series on Texas whiskey, maybe a show a month for the next several months. We're going to get Josh Gardner on here from Ranger Creek, and we'll get one or both of the Licorice Brothers on here from Iron Root, and some others. Shannon Hood, who is a big Texas whiskey fan. She's going to be on with us. So we're gonna do a few months of Texas whiskey shows. But ZZ Top's Eliminator album, which was without a doubt their biggest hit, March 23rd of 1983, that album was first released. And that's kind of the defining moment for ZZ Top.
Okay.
Because that took them to huge commercial success.
Mm-hmm.
But there were 6 albums that came out before Eliminator. But a lot of people's first introduction to ZZ Top was that album. ZZ Top was founded in 1969. Billy Gibbons, who is the lead singer and guitarist for them, had a couple of different bands before then, had a band called Moving Sidewalks. ZZ Top actually opened for Jimi Hendrix and played Foxy Lady and Purple Haze as part of their set before Jimi Hendrix.
Oh, man.
So, they had some stones about them. But 2 of the members of Moving Sidewalks got drafted, and so that kind of brought that group to an end. And he brought in Frank Beard, basically traced down Billy Gibbons because Billy was gaining a reputation in the Houston area, and Frank Beard, who was the drummer, tracked down Billy Gibbons, and they did a jam session together. And then it kind of clicked, and Frank Beard said, "Hey, I've got this buddy Dusty Hill who plays bass. I think he would fit in." And so they got Dusty Hill in, and ZZ Top was born. Their first album was cleverly called ZZ Top's first album. ZZ Top's first album, and that was back in 1971. And those guys played together for over 50 years. until Dusty passed away in July of 2021. But ZZ Top is still touring, and they'll actually be in Kentucky in August. They're releasing a new album later this year, a live album called Raw. And so some of that album will actually have Dusty Hill on it, both on bass and vocals. So that'll be great. So initial thoughts on ZZ Top, Ben. Anything that really strikes you?
I just remember my first, experience in hearing ZZ Top. The song "Everybody Knows" Legs. It's so a big thing for me was like Saturday mornings. I would go up to my cousin's house, and we'd sit there and watch Casey Kasem's Top 10 video countdown.
Mm-hmm.
And hearing that song, seeing the video, and hearing him kind of give the background spiel on ZZ Top. I mean, I was good grief. That was probably around 83, 84, somewhere around that time period. Yeah. So when that album came out and that song became a big hit, and
came out
that for me was like my first introduction to ZZ Top, and from there it was just love at first sound. So that's still in my mind is like one of the absolute highlights, because that is so cool. and just to even remember it from back then.
But there's the Eliminator album was epic,
right?
In terms of commercial success,
but it's not really, from a musical standpoint, it's not really their best album.
I would agree.
Yeah.
ZZ Top did. They had, again, ZZ Top's first album. Then they had Rio Grande Mud, and then they had Tres Hombres, which to me is the pinnacle of ZZ Topness.
Mm-hmm.
Then they did Fandango and Tejas, and then they took a break. They had done the worldwide Texas tour, which was, it was like part circus, part rock and roll show. They had buffalo and longhorn steer and rattlesnakes and you name it, anything that was Texas, they were taking to the world. But at that point, the world was basically the United States. Okay. But the success that they had from this Tres Hombres album afforded them the options of being able to do something a little different. At that point, they had a little bit of money, and not a lot, but they had a little, and could go and really elaborate on the tour. And that's where that whole Texas pride thing came in. Like we were talking about with the Texas whiskey before, it was, hey, we're Texas. This is what we do, and it's better than what everybody else does. And you need to know about it, and you need to love it. And that was kind of the attitude that came through with ZZ Top and this worldwide Texas tour. But at that point, they had been touring basically for 6 or 7 years nonstop and recording 6 or 7 years nonstop. And so they took a break, and they took like a 3-year break. Frank Beard went into rehab because it was basically when they didn't have any money, he was high on cheap drugs. And when they had a little money, he spent it all on expensive drugs. But he went into rehab and he got sober. Billy Gibbons toured Europe, and that had a huge impact on the ZZ Top sound going forward. And Dusty Hill took a fake name and went to work at an airport. So
fantastic.
Just to kind of reconnect with reality.
Right.
So that was kind of that break that they had, and then they came out with the album De Guayo in '79, and they were the new label Warner Brothers, and some of the influence that Billy Gibbons had from spending time in Europe started to show up a little bit then. But when they got into their next album, El Loco, he was talking with of all bands that you would expect Billy Gibbons to talk to, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark and Depeche Mode. And the things that he took away from them were synthesizer sounds, electronic drums, and a little bit of choreography on the stage. But also during that break, that was when the beards came into play. So let's see if I've got a photo of the early stuff here. I don't know if I've got it on here, but the beards that they were noted for, that Billy and Dusty were noted for, they grew during their hiatus. And Frank Beard, who was actually named Beard, didn't have one.
Never had one.
So,
and that's one of the things I remember, even from back in that early '80s. That whole the Casey Kasem thing was him talking about their hiatus before coming back. That was kind of part of the story that he would give before diving into the whatever their top 10 video was of that time, which at the moment was Legs, but yeah.
And if you look at that Eliminator album, it had the big singles were "Give Me All Your Lovin'," "Sharp Dressed Man," and "Legs."
Yeah.
And perhaps better than any other band that was popular in the 70s, they transitioned to the 80s exceptionally well.
Right.
Because you're at the MTV era. And in order to continue, one of the things that ZZ Top did, and everybody thinks about that distorted guitar sound and that really gravelly voice of Billy Gibbons, but they changed a lot over the years. When they came back from that hiatus, the punk scene that Billy Gibbons discovered when he was in Europe, it had some impact on their albums. And then the electronic scene, the electronic music that he discovered from, again, Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark and Depeche Mode, that definitely had an impact on their music. When they came out with that, there was really a trio of albums. There was Eliminator, there was Afterburner, and Recycler. Those were kind of the big three electronic albums. And they did what they called Six Pack, which was a reissue of their first 6 albums with that kind of electronic. They redid the drums. All the drums were drum machine drums, and there was a lot of electronic focus in the way they redid the mix, and it was horrible, in my opinion. It was horrible. You don't need to hear Lagrange with electric drums. You just don't. It's like a sin against nature. But they did it, and you can find it, you can listen to it, but to me, that's not ZZ Top.
Right. It was trying to almost innovate for the sake of innovation instead of just being true to who you are.
Yeah. But the Eliminator album, while it didn't necessarily have that, it didn't have that all of that traditional ZZ Top sound. It had enough of it, and then mingled it with the modern sound that it just took off.
Yep.
And 1983, I was a sophomore in high school, and you could not get away from this album. It was everywhere.
Right.
It was on. There was a ZZ Top song off of this album on the radio every hour. It was on MTV every hour. It was everywhere. And honestly, was the first big introduction for me to ZZ Top. And then I kind of dive back.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. These guys have a lot more blues in them
Yes.
than you necessarily got
Right.
out of the Eliminator album.
That for me, I mean, not to cut you off in any way, but for me was my interest in ZZ Top was mainly the kind of, for a long time, was just the classic radio. Here's the hits. Here's what you know.
Yep.
That's, you hear ZZ Top, you never change the channel. You usually just turn it up.
Yeah.
And then several years ago, I mean, I'd never seen them live. Beyond just occasionally catching something on TV or whatever. And then several years ago, happened to catch the Clapton's Crossroads Festival up in Chicago.
Yeah.
And ZZ Top performed in that, and watching them perform. And then it was just like, oh, this goes to a whole other level of what I realized ZZ Top was about. And that for me started the real journey of, all right, I need to start deep diving these guys a lot more than I ever realized, just taking them for, this is a classic rock band. That's cool. Here's their hits, whatever. There was other things I was more interested in, to all of a sudden realizing, okay, there's a lot more to the legend of ZZ Top than what I was giving credit for. So,
yeah. But as the cycle goes for a lot of classic rock bands, you kind of hit a peak, and then you're basically producing an album so you can go on tour. Right?
Rolling Stone.
What? Wait, what? If the only album that ZZ Top ever did was Eliminator, you think this is awesome. This is
sure,
because
there's more than a one-hit wonder. I mean,
yes, absolutely,
yeah,
some fantastic songs on there,
right?
But if you jump in at that point and you go forward, then you're probably going to be a little disappointed. But if you jump in at that point and you go back,
right,
then you're going to be, oh my gosh,
right.
This is incredible. This is very different, because it is, yes, it's blues, but it's blues in filtered through a rock and roll mindset.
Right.
Yes.
And that was one of the things that was amazing to me about ZZ Top. Now, even if you take, the trio of electric albums, again, Eliminator, Afterburner, Recycler, and there's some good songs on there, but even within those albums, which to me, Eliminator and Recycler were not that good. And some of the things they've done since in studio albums they don't measure up to things like ZZ Top's first album and Tres Hombres and Fandango and that kind of thing.
Right.
But I can sit there and I can listen to it, because Billy Gibbons' guitar is amazing.
Yep.
It's just, it's just fantastic. I can just sit and listen to him play forever.
Right.
And the songs themselves may not be that great, the lyrics may not be that great, but then he'll clip into a guitar solo, and it's just awesome. And one of the things, just going back and revisiting ZZ Top the last couple of weeks, getting ready for this show, that just really shines through.
Right.
How incredible of a guitarist he is.
And that's something that's impacted a lot of just guitarists in general. I mean, when you talk to a lot of non-professional guitarists, one of the classic things they're going, everybody wants that Brown sound, that Van Halen sound kind of thing. One of the other big tones that people are chasing after is the Billy Gibbons sound. Give me a Les Paul. Let's get the special humbuckers put in there. They're chasing that ZZ Top sound, that Texas blues rock kind of thing going. And he's, you talk about top guitarists, that guy ranks right up there with impact on musicians going forward. So
I'll tell you somebody that you can hear that all over, that has kind of done a good job of borrowing and being influenced, but doing their own thing with the blues rock sound.
Right.
And out of Texas is Gary Clark Jr.
See, that's a guy I was going to go to when I talk Texas music right now. That's my dude, Gary Clark Jr. Freaking love the sound, but he's just kind of catapulted himself off of what Billy Gibbons and ZZ Top already did.
Exactly right. Exactly right. You can tell he grew up listening to him.
Yes. Got that influence is there in spades.
Yeah. And you can. I think you can see a lot of the lasting influence of Billy Gibbons in some of the more modern artists that have gravitated towards him. You look at Josh Homme of Queens and the Stone Age. Yeah, he's a big fan, and Billy Gibbons played on a couple of songs in his Desert Sessions albums.
Which, if there's a listener out there that's never checked out the Desert Sessions, I don't care which one, man, you want to talk about one of the most eclectic and unique and amazing musical experiences? Those things are phenomenal.
There is a song, I think it's on Desert Sessions Volume 11, that Billy Gibbons did the lyrics on and did the vocals on. It is one of the most unique songs vocally and lyrically that you'll ever hear from Billy Gibbons. It's called Move Together. It's outstanding. I love it. I love it. So we'll definitely put that on the playlist for this show.
Absolutely.
But if you go on through some of the ZZ Top discography, the last studio album they did was called La Futura, and it was in 2012, produced by Rick Rubin, which was the only album that ZZ Top has done that was not produced by either Bill Ham, who was their original producer and manager, or by Billy Gibbons. And so Rubin was involved in La Futura, and a lot of critics said this was taking them back to the early days ZZ Top sound, which that kind of makes sense when you think about Rubin. Which makes me wonder, what if Rick Rubin produced Eliminator?
Right. What could have been?
That would have been interesting.
Really special.
That would have been interesting to see. There are two other bands of that kind of era that I want to compare and contrast just a minute with ZZ Top. And one is Aerosmith, and the other is AC/DC.
Okay.
How do you see these being similar?
I have a third I'm going to throw at you that's going to be completely out of left field, but let's talk these two first.
All right.
Yeah. There's a distinct guitar tone and a distinct vocalist in both those bands.
Yeah.
For sure. And that's kind of the whole deal.
Right.
You know, but otherwise, I don't know that I'd be as familiar with their catalogs enough to draw specific parallels.
There's also the ongoing commercial success of all three
Mhm.
that like carries through almost multiple decades, multiple generations. And there's also, I think all three bands have gone through a kind of here's our early phase. Here's we kind of faded. We had a fade out, and then we came back and regenerated ourselves. Almost in multiple iterations.
Yep.
I mean, obviously, AC/DC went through it with the loss of their original lead singer, and then bringing on their second. ZZ Top kind of did that with their fade out early on, and then coming back, later on. Aerosmith they've been around for freaking, it feels like forever sometimes. If you go back to some of their first hits, original songs, and they've almost, it's like each decade, each generation, they've kind of somehow been able to bring themselves back again to the forefront. And so I kind of see there's some, to me, familiar threads that run through all of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that you're looking at with the ZZ Top to AC/DC comparison. They're just very guitar hook driven bands.
Yep.
And even a AC/DC album that is not a great album, I'll still sit and listen to it because it's going to have a great guitar hook. And with Aerosmith, they were also kind of a blues-based band, different part of the country, but a blues-based band that reinvented itself for the MTV generation. Because you look, it is a few years after ZZ Top did it.
Yeah.
But you look at like the Permanent Vacation album, I think it had Dude Looks Like a Lady and Love and Elevator.
Yep.
They embraced that video era. Those two bands that were 1970s bands embraced that video era probably as well as any other band out of the 70s. And it propelled them to a level of success that they hadn't known before. Now, they were good before. I mean, Aerosmith had Toys in the Attic. ZZ Top had Tres Hombres. Great albums. Huge success. Great radio play. But what took them worldwide was the way both of those bands embraced the MTV era.
Right.
And that was a very unique time in history for that to happen.
So, yeah, very well. So the third band I'm going to throw a comparison to, and I guarantee I'm going to get some pushback from you on this, Kevin, in the start, and probably from a lot of people listening, because the thoughts toward this band is almost on the level of Nickelback kind of thing, but the Goo Goo Dolls. So, and here's my comparison, is because they're seen as like a pop sellout kind of band. Like what most people know about them radio wise is a lot of their pop hits. But if you go back to their first two albums, they have a strong post-punk influence, and it's kind of like late 80s, early 90s. They had those first two albums, and then all of a sudden they produced that single Iris, which was on the soundtrack for that Nicolas Cage movie. And boom, that they just they caught commercial success, and they sold out, and they completely transformed their sound and everything as a band. But if you go back to them, it's kind of like, and not saying the same thing, but it's like kind of like ZZ Top. You go back and listen to their first two albums, you go back and listen to some of their early stuff compared to what their later stuff is. It's almost radically different, and it's like your thoughts and your respect for them as a band will completely change. I still go back and listen to those first two Goo Goo Dolls albums. I think they're rough, they're raw. It's lyrically interesting. They have a completely different feel, and then all of a sudden after that, mid 90s and on, they completely change and they become the kind of pop wonder that everybody thinks of them as.
Yep.
And a lot of people who are serious music people show them no regard because they're seen as just pop sugar, basically. And but you go back previous to that, it's a really different sound. It's a really different band. And that's coming out of Buffalo. They had a real strong post-punk kind of sound going on. And I invite anybody, go back, listen to early Goo Goo Dolls and compare that to what they are now. Not the same thing. And it's kind of the same thing with like ZZ Top in that way. You go back and listen to their 70s stuff. It's not the same thing necessarily as their 80s and beyond. So,
yeah, I'm not I couldn't really speak a lot to the Goo Goo Dolls because that's something that I saw it as, okay, this is pop.
Yeah, that's just it. People know from this one era kind of thing. And it's like, you go back and look a little bit earlier than that, you're going to find something different.
Now, the other there were two other comparisons that I thought of that I didn't initially include in my notes, but one was Rush, because you had a band that had a pretty tight cult-like following that, you know, for ZZ Top was risking alienating their fans, going to drum machines and synthesizers when they just started doing El Loco and to a greater extent on Eliminator. And then you had Rush that started using keyboards in their albums, and again, risking alienating a fan base. Both survived it and both thrived on it. Another is Van Halen. You look at what Van Halen was pre-1984 and after 1984. It's a different sound. A lot of it due to the introduction of keyboards, and obviously you had a lead singer change in there a little after that as well. So it's interesting to think about the risks that bands take, and there's a documentary called the Little Old Band from Texas. It's on Netflix. It's really good. And Dusty Hill, in part of the interview, he was asked about, you know, the changes that the band went through, and he said, if you don't change, then you're just playing shuffle and see forever, and we didn't want to do that. And so something had to be working well for them, because they stuck together for 50 years or more. And so there was something in that formula that worked, and the willingness to take some risks and just try some different things. You know, it definitely paid off for ZZ Top.
Absolutely.
Yep.
But as far as I'm concerned, there are. I couldn't give you a whole list right off the top of my head, but one song that I consider perfect is Lagrange.
Right.
I just think it's just perfect, and it's about a minute and a half with lyrics, and then it's about 2.5 minutes of guitar solos. And that moment in the middle where it kind of goes back to the intro of Frank Beard playing on the rim of the snare drum, and Billy Gibbons strumming on the guitar, and then it kicks back into that second guitar solo. That's a perfect music moment for me. I love it. It's one of those songs that if it's on the radio and I've just pulled into the driveway, I'm not getting out of the car until that song is over.
Right. I don't know if there's a single ZZ Top song that hits the radio that you're kind of not that way. Like I said, it's when you hear them, I don't change the station, or I don't change whatever. I usually just turn it up, you know? And when you think, for me, it's like when you think Texas music, I mean, yeah, Stevie Ray Vaughan is like right there, but ZZ Top is like right there too.
Yep.
That's like your top two. There's a number of other great, fantastic musicians out of Texas in the blues rock kind of genre, but I mean, those two, that's it. That defines it almost.
All right. So, any other thoughts on ZZ Top?
Just legend. I mean, they rightfully so, you know.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's talk about where we can be found on social media. Ben, how about yourself?
Follow me at Padawan_distiller on Instagram.
Mm-hmm.
You can learn about, get a little bit of behind the scenes view of what goes on in distilling in Kentucky as I work for Kentucky Artisan.
Mm-hmm.
You can also catch me on My Whiskey Den, which is another YouTube show where we're going to take a deep dive into craft whiskey here in the U.S. and beyond with my cohorts there, Patrick and Mike. We have a great time and some good interviews. So
awesome. All right, Drew, how about you?
Yep, you can find me on Twitter at DrewCrawley63 and Instagram at Drew.Crawley63.
Awesome. And for me, just follow us on Bourbon Turntable. Like, share, comment. Leave us a review. We're on YouTube. We're on your favorite podcast formats. Leave us a review. Tell us how we're doing. We want to know. And for our next show we have coming up, we will have...
So we're going to have our good friend Blake Reaver from Sealbox on the show. He's going to be talking about a variety of subjects, but really his passion aligns with a lot of ours in highlighting whiskeys, especially on the craft side, that maybe not everybody has had the chance to experience. So I'm sure it'll be a great conversation, and Blake's a great guy and a good friend. So look forward to having him on.
Yep. All right. So on behalf of Drew and Ben and all the guys at ZZ Top, haw, 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 haw. Cheers, love, and free bird.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Night, everybody.